Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Cameron McGill. On behalf of the Visiting Writer Series at WSU and my co-director, Julian Ankney, thank you for joining us tonight as we welcome essayist and author Courtney Ann LaFaive to Washington State University. We are especially excited as Courtney's second book, Follow the Signs, Searching for Linda Goodman, America's Forgotten Astrology Queen, is going to be published on May 12th from the University of Iowa Press. So congrats, Courtney, and we'll post a link to the pre-order in the YouTube Live. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. The WSU Pullman is located on the homelands of the Nimipu and the traditional homelands of the Palouse band of indigenous people. We acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. We view the land acknowledgement as a first but necessary step in our work to serve and honor our communities and our land grant mission. The Visiting Writer Series is committed to honoring this acknowledgement by bringing to campus writers working at the top of their fields whose voices, identities, stories, and perspectives enrich our communities, the minds and lives of our students, and our university as a whole. These events have for many years been made possible by a lot of hearts and minds, a partnership between WSU Pullman and WSU Vancouver English departments, the WSU College of Arts and Sciences, Land Escapes, the Native American programs, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, and the Provost's Media Group. Thank you all for your support of the series over the years. Before we get started, just a bit about the run of the show this evening. Courtney is going to read for about 25 to 30 minutes or so, followed by a Q&A. And I will ask, and Julian will ask, as we get closer to the Q&A, that you please post your questions for Courtney in the YouTube live chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. I would now like to welcome our Visiting Writers Series intern, Elise Opheim, to introduce Courtney. Elise?
All right, thank you. Courtney Ann LaFaive is an essayist, educator, and author of 2 books. Her second book, Follow the Signs, Searching for Linda Goodman, America's Forgotten Astrology Queen, is forthcoming from the University of Iowa Press in 2026. She is also the author of the chapbook Address Unknown and the memoir Daughter in Retrograde. Her essays have been listed as notable in the 2020, 2021, and 2023 editions of the Best American Essays and can be seen or are forthcoming from the Missouri Review, Worms Magazine, and River Teeth. Her work has garnered her a Fulbright Fellowship to Riga, Latvia, and support from the American Scandinavian Foundation, KH Messen, the C. Wani Writers Conference, USF Furftet, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Courtney is an assistant professor of English at the University of North Dakota.
Elise, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Over the past few years, I have been doing a project that has taken me to Norway several times. So now in my biography, there are several Norwegian words, and you did great with those words. So thank you so much. Thank you also to Cameron and Julian for having me here. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you all tonight. And thank you also to Bill for making the technology part of this event happen. And of course, thank you so much to the community at WSU for having me and for tuning in tonight. I'm really excited to be able to be here. So, as Cameron alluded to in his introduction, I'm going to be sharing a bit from my book that's coming out next month on May 12th called Follow the Signs: Searching for Linda Goodman, America's Forgotten Astrology Queen. So, before we dive into the reading, I want to give you just a little bit of context in case you don't know who Linda Goodman is. So, Linda Goodman was a very popular astrologer during the 1960s and 70s. Her first book, Sun Signs, right here, was the first book about astrology to make it onto the New York Times bestsellers list, which at the time, that was a big deal. Even though astrology today is very popular, before that, it was a little bit occult. It wasn't cool or hip. It was seen as this kind of weird thing that a certain group of people were interested in. And Linda Goodman really brought it to the mainstream with her books. And so, also notably, her second book, 1978's Love Signs, which is a very thick book. It's 1,000 pages. She got the then highest advance ever given for a book at $2.25 million. And so years later, in the 2000s, I discovered Linda Goodman's work, obviously in a completely different generation than Linda Goodman and a completely different generation from the people that really liked her work. And I was really enchanted with it. And so, I thought her life was I thought it was interesting that we don't really think of her a lot today when we think about the history of astrology. And I think one of the reasons that we tend not to think of her is because of something else that happened during the 1970s. So in 1973, Linda Goodman's daughter, Sally, commits suicide. But Linda refused to believe that Sally was dead. And instead, she went on this decades-long search looking for Sally. She spent all of that $2 million, and she came up with some rather obscure theories, like she thought that Sally maybe was kidnapped by the CIA. She mused at one point that maybe Sally had 9 doubles, and there were different doubles of Sally, but the real Sally was still alive. And so in the press, Linda Goodman was mocked for this. People didn't really see her as a person who was understandably grieving the death of her daughter. Instead, she was seen as kind of a freak. And so I set out to write this book to redeem her in a way and to try to recuperate her literary legacy and to see her as a foremother of American pop astrology, which if you are on the internet today, you know that astrology is popular. And so I wanted to place her in that particular lineage. But what became a little bit tricky about doing this project is that I had intended to write a biography. And I thought, oh, this will be easy. I'll just find an archive of her work and I'll use this archive to narrate her life. And as many people who are historians or biographers know, that doesn't always happen. The people that we remember in documents, it's often correlated to the hierarchies that we live with every day. And so there are many lives that are not included in the archive. And so it was quite interesting to me. Linda Goodman had a relative amount of privilege. She was someone that millions of people read. But when I went to find information out about her, I still didn't find a lot of information. And the very first interview I did, I was trying to find these notes called star notes that Linda Goodman had written during the 1980s. So I tracked down this guy in Texas who had these star notes. So I flew to Texas and I was going to look at his personal archive. And so I had never met a source before. I'd never really looked at a personal archive before. And at a certain point in our conversation, I got really nervous. And so I just started babbling. And at a certain point in my rambling, I said something like, how old would Linda Goodman be if she was alive today? And this was, I don't know how many years ago. This was like 6 or 7 years ago. And so I thought he was going to say, well, Linda Goodman would be 95 or 96. And instead, this man said to me, well, Courtney, Linda Goodman isn't dead. When she was alive, she always told people that she was 400 years old. So by today, she'd probably be 500 years old. And she did write a book about how to achieve immortality, which she did write a book about how to achieve immortality. And in my sort of like newness to writing biography, I was like, oh, I'm not going to worry about that. And then I soon realized after talking with this man that I was going to have to grapple with Linda Goodman and writing her life in a completely different way than I had ever anticipated. And so I give you this long preamble to let you know that in the particular section that I'm going to read from you today, my solution to this conundrum of how do you write a biography about someone that doesn't have an archive and whose archive that you have is quite fragile. It's full of some lies, full of make believe. How do you write about that? My solution was to imagine parts of Linda Goodman's life, certainly with the acknowledgement that I am imagining it, that this is not based on fact. This is based on, sometimes it's an interview I did with someone who thought that Linda Goodman was still alive. I used message boards. I talked to psychics. I did all kinds of things. And of course, some of those things are not the typical routes that you take in biography. But that's what I did to try to narrate Linda Goodman's life. And so in the particular section that I'm going to read from you today, this is about the events that happened right after Linda Goodman learned that her daughter Sally had possibly committed suicide. So just so you know, this text does mention suicide, and it's towards the beginning. And so if that's something that you don't necessarily want to listen to, totally get it. I would probably you can tune out or mute for the next 3 to 4 minutes. And then by that point, you can jump back in and we'll be on another topic. All right, so this is a selection from Follow the Signs. Sally is the taken. That's how Linda describes what happened to Sally in the 1979 People magazine article. She says, I know Sally isn't dead. I don't know exactly why she was taken, but I feel the time is right for her to reappear. Yet, reports of what police found at the scene contradict any sense of taking, as in a disappearance or a kidnapping. And by reports, I mean information I found on the Linda Land Internet Forum from someone who claims to be Linda's former friend, Bibi D'Angelo, who posted on October 27th, 2007. Bibi is someone I'd written to months ago, someone who never received or replied to my queries, someone who possibly isn't even alive or real. But if she were to write back to me, if she were to tell me about Sally's disappearance, this is what I envisioned she would have said. I imagine she would have said this idea of taking, split at the root from the very beginning, as in taking your own life versus being taken by someone. Because the reason police went to Sally's apartment in the first place was because, according to Bibi, friends of Sally who had stopped by to visit noticed a peculiar and unpleasant smell emanating from apartment 6B. Because when police opened the door, they found the decomposed body of a young female. So the question that rang throughout the apartment wasn't, where did she go? It was, how did this happen? Because according to Bibi, the original police report read, no blood, phone perfectly clean, bed in vertical position. I can't tell you what they found first, nor can I describe the apartment's layout, but I imagine the cops examined the walls and saw nothing but flaking paint and oily handprints. I would think they looked in the bathroom and didn't see a crimson streak across the tile floor. They didn't see the footprints of a struggle. They didn't smell a lover's cologne left on the sofa or see heavy footprints in this carpeting. There wasn't a knife or a rope, not that a weapon would have been left behind. The apartment told them it had never been there in the first place. The apartment said, she's been alone for days. The cabinet said, there's nothing in here. Stocking the pantry, I imagine, wasn't what concerned Sally. Something else haunted the woman who lived here. Was there worn carpeting near the window that looked out onto the Alexander Hamilton Bridge? Did she contemplate what it would feel like to jump off the steel beams? Or was she merely looking at the traffic on the street below? I imagine police saw what Bibi describes as an 8-page handwritten note describing Great Depression. They saw the hollow pill bottle barbiturates. They saw their verdict unfurl before them, suicide. Call the coroner, call her stepfather, Sam Goodman, call the crematorium. The case is closed. I'm sorry, but Sally is dead. Is this what Sam, Linda's second husband, then estranged, though legally still married, told Linda when he called? Did he say he was the one who had identified Sally? He must have, right? That's what Beebe says. Because according to Beebe, Linda wasn't in New York when Sally died. She was in Cripple Creek, Colorado, doing the things that spiritual gurus of the 1960s did, like start their own religions, wear prayer beads, and write 1,000-page astrological guides to love and romance. Beebe doesn't speak of this in her account, but I imagine there was some argument when Linda insisted, whether in that conversation or later, that Sally had disappeared. Because, in one sense, she had. The old Sally, the girl that they had sent to school years ago at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the girl who had hopes of becoming an actress, was no longer. Maybe Sam conceded that, yes, abstractly, the old Sally has disappeared, Linda. But I imagine Linda insisted, no, disappeared, as in alive, but just stepped out for a moment. Maybe Sam had to say it again. No, Linda, she's dead. I saw the body. But it doesn't matter what Sam said, because for Linda, this situation was a quintessential disappearance, body or no body. The body wasn't the problem. The problem was that Linda had also been working on a book that would expose the US government's illicit activities. And in the months before Sally's disappearance, Linda had received phone calls threatening her children's lives. The problem was that Linda knew she had people in spades who wanted to shut her up. Because when you think someone has vanished, the questions drop and run like marbles across the kitchen floor. So the thing Linda needed to figure out first was, how can I prove it? Beebe never speaks of the exact conversation between Linda and Sam, but the way I see it, Sam was never going to tell Linda what she wanted to hear, so she hangs up on him. Maybe she had to. What else are you going to do with an estranged husband who won't say the words that you want him to say? You'd stop talking and find the people who would say them to you. In New York, the police had already collected the evidence used to determine Sally's cause of death. And in Cripple Creek, I imagine that Linda had began to collect her own. Her first point of evidence were her feelings, in her guts, her fingertips, twanging through her. The feeling was not surprise, denial, or anger. She didn't throw herself on the couch to weep. Her body knew this wasn't a moment for such dramatics. This moment felt like sitting in that Catholic church back in West Virginia as a little girl and recognizing that the priest's words found no resonance within her. It was like watching her first husband, Bill, drink and trying to believe he was just fine. Did she feel the same discord drifting through her? Maybe she knew that no police officer, coroner, or judge would care, but it mattered nonetheless. Sally couldn't be dead. Linda must have felt it and known it, and that was enough. The second point of evidence was Sally's natal chart. She says it in the 1979 People magazine article. I've done her chart over and over again. I imagine that Linda cast the chart on butcher paper spread on the living room floor. She saw her daughter, her Scorpio child, mysterious and tenacious, the daughter who snuck off with her boyfriend Mark during that picnic last summer and lied about it to Linda's face, the daughter with whom she had conversations that were nothing but silence between two obstinate women. Linda examined how death wove its way into her daughter's chart and saw nothing like what the police had told her. No suicides or overdoses. Linda instead saw a strange emphasis on the 12th house, the house of kidnappings, convents, and things stowed away. Was it then that she threw herself into the couch and wept when she saw so clearly what might have occurred? Her third point of evidence was that she simply knew too much. But why? Why would someone threaten Linda's children? Wasn't she just some harmless New Age nitwit who spoke about love, light, and natural birth control? Sure, she did write about all that, but Linda knew she wasn't just some New Age idiot. She had manuscripts sitting on her desk that spoke of other things: corruption and Richard Nixon, clandestine activities and hush money, governmental tinkering outside the boundaries of the law. According to Beebe, Linda had been writing a book about a boat called StarQuest that was connected to Watergate and was an alleged floating brothel onto which to lure political opponents, then tape and photograph them in compromising positions. Maybe years ago, when she was still Mary Alice. Also, just a pause, I forgot to tell you, Linda Goodman's original name isn't Linda Goodman. She was born Mary Alice, so she changed it at a certain point. Okay. Maybe years ago, when she was still Mary Alice, when she was just reciting love letters from soldiers on the radio when she was a DJ, no one would have cared what she had to say about the American government. But now she was on the New York Times bestsellers list. Millions of people read her work. Maybe now the government would care so much that they'd go to great lengths to silence her. Perhaps even they'd take down someone innocent in their pursuit. And there was no one more innocent than Sally. And her fourth point of evidence were the threats. And perhaps Linda didn't know that the threats would become evidence because she didn't realize that they would one day become evidence, she didn't write them down or think to mark when they happened on a calendar, but she remembered them with precision. According to Bibi, the threats came while Linda was investigating StarQuest, and some had only been made a couple of weeks before the news that Sally was dead. Maybe they came in the morning, 2 or 3 a.m. The phone would ring and Linda would patter to the phone in her stockinged feet to answer it. Hello, she would say. Sometimes there was just breath, other times only an unnerving silence. Then a click. Maybe the first time she thought it was those high school kids who poked fun at her house with its stained glass murals of Egyptian gods, or maybe it was just some drunk. Once she fell back into bed, full of longing, believing it was a secret admirer. But I imagine that in the beginning, she didn't think much of it until one evening when the breath began to speak and it uttered threats against the lives of her 4 children. Or did the threats come typed via notes and sealed with wax, cryptic telegrams? Or were they more an abstract feeling that stayed with Linda, a notion she couldn't shake, an omen that stirred within her and raised its head in the moments when she could listen, on a plane to Los Angeles or in between changing records on the stereo? Was it then that she felt it, when she knew something beyond her was looming and would threaten those she loved the most? Maybe the warning was there. Maybe it was only in retrospect that she could see the signs. Perhaps it was only then she wondered whether this would have happened if she had acted sooner. To Linda, the evidence could only mean one thing, but if she was going to prove it, she would have to get to New York. And if she wasn't weeping before, then she would be upon realizing she'd have to buy a plane ticket to get there. According to the People article, her royalties from Sun Signs had been withheld when she failed to deliver a second book to her publisher as promised. Furthermore, they describe her at the time as penniless and living on welfare. So Linda would have to dial phone numbers she normally liked to dial. However, this time she would have to say the things she didn't want to have to say. It made her woozy just to think about it. She collapsed onto her unmade bed and moaned. She thrashed around for a bit, hoping that if she threw a big enough fit, a different solution might appear to her. She kneeled before her stained glass mural of St. Francis of Assisi and asked for help. Send money, quickly. No matter, that night, I imagine she shuffled to the kitchen, makeup still smeared from rubbing her eyes, tied her bathrobe belt around her waist, and sat in front of the telephone, knowing what she had to do. Linda was going to have to beg, or as people put it, friends would help her. Linda was known to buy new cars and jewelry for her friends in Colorado Springs, and I imagine she bought dinner for everybody at the Palace Hotel and Casino every other weekend. And when you walked into her house in Cripple Creek, there was a hot tub out back, an in-ground pool in the basement, and a giant golden statue of Osiris in the living room, and a brand new washer-dryer unit humming somewhere on the first floor. An outsider probably wouldn't guess that she'd been thinking about how many pennies were in the jar on her dresser. I get that it's surprising, but it was the rumor and by all accounts the truth. She was a spender and a gifter. Her accountant, Joe Cohen, knew it. He's quoted in Cynthia Sands's 1995 remembrance of Linda Goodman as saying, "I've seen her empty her pockets to anyone who asks. She's incredibly naive." She'd also promised money to this person or that person and had eventually frittered away all the cash she earned before it was even in her pocket. It's what former agent Arthur Klebanoff describes in his book, The Agent. Just like in the musical The Producers, Linda Goodman had given others percentages of revenue in the book totaling well over 100%. Some of the recipients loaned her money, provided lodging, or were helping her on one of her many other projects. So when Linda got the news that Sally had killed herself, and she knew it just couldn't be true, how else was she going to get to New York but beg for plane fare? I imagine she called her friend Ruth in Colorado Springs. She called Steve McQueen and Ally McGraw, who were also friends. There were probably others. This producer she met at that Halloween party back in October, and that actress from the garden party last spring. She must have had a list or peeled through a Rolodex, or her manager, Aaron Goldblatt, had their contact information. Sam had told Linda that Sally had taken her own life. But what did Linda tell her friends and far-flung acquaintances when she spoke with them? How developed were her theories at that point? Did she say she just wanted to double check the police reports? Did she talk about the phone calls she had received? The natal chart that said it just couldn't be true? Or did she say, Sam told me that Sally's dead and I have to get there for myself to see it? Whatever she said, it worked. Thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Oh, it's wonderful to get a sneak peek at the new book. Congratulations.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Uh, I am, admittedly, I know nothing of astrology, and I have had my charts done by friends who are quite interested in it, and I feel like it's the final frontier for me, really, I guess. So I'm just very interesting to learn about it, and um, I I I was thinking a bit about um your first book, your memoir, Daughter in Retrograde. And I was interested if you could talk a little bit about the difference in approach to writing these. So Courtney's first book is Daughter in Retrograde, which is a memoir, and the new book, Follow the Sign, with Linda Goodman. I'm interested in that move from the familial in the memoir to the non-familial in biography, and how that searching for and that understanding of your subjects were both probably totally different explorations, but at the same time, maybe very strangely similar.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'm just thinking of the mother and daughter connection in both of the stories. But yeah, I'm just curious a little bit about if you could share kind of your process in navigating both those worlds.
Yeah, of course. Cameron, I think you're a Leo. Is that what you are?
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think I I think I actually might have like did your chart. We were in grad school together,
Yeah,
probably.
that's right.
I
Yeah,
remember
maybe
you
not.
being a Leo. And I don't know how else I would know that. So, well, I'm
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. I've got some that this is true. This is true. I know that I'm supposed to marry a rat late in life.
Oh,
So I don't know.
I
That's
don't know. I think I maybe disagree. Unless you want that, unless you would like such a thing.
no,
But
I
I would
don't know.
also say
I don't
Linda
know what
might.
it means.
I don't think that means anything.
Okay, good. Okay.
Personally,
Okay.
I think you get to do whatever you want.
Okay.
Um, but to answer your question, I actually think so. If I'm honest, when I started writing the Linda Goodman book, I thought it was just going to be a straight up biography. So I was like, I'm going to find this archive, I'm going to construct a narrative from this archive. And I didn't think that my own personal narrative would factor into it at all. And so in my first book, Daughter in Retrograde, I would say that that's a much more sort of traditional memoir. In memoir, you look at the arcs of your life and you zero into a particular arc in whatever way you want that to look like. And so, for me, I took a very traditional route. You have rising action, crisis, falling action, resolution. And so that book to me felt much more straightforward because the archive was me. It was using this, it was just my life. There wasn't any research in it at all. And so I think the most challenging thing about that book was just learning how to use the raw material of your life as the fodder for telling a story, which inherently our lives don't always unfold in such ways. And so I think that was the big challenge of that book. And I think this book, I had to use that same kind of arc, but this book was really, it was so challenging because, and so initially I was like, oh, I'm going to write this book about Linda Goodman. And then I realized I can't really write this biography in the way that I thought because this whole archive I have, like, first of all, I don't have enough information, and the information I do have, it's not verifiable. A lot of it is make believe, some of it is a lie. And so at a certain point, I thought to myself, I think I have to abandon this project. Like, I don't think that this is going to work. And then I read a book by Nathalie Léger. She's a French writer, Sweet for Barbara Loden. And it's a biographical project about the actress and director Barbara Loden. And her book, I wouldn't say it's an imagined biography, but it's very lyrical. And so I looked at that book and I thought, okay, well, maybe I could do something similar to this, where I'm talking more about the impression that I have of Linda Goodman's book and or of her life and her books, and I can insert my own critique and commentary into it. And so the book became a little bit more like a researched memoir in that way. But I think the thing that was really tricky about it was in the first book, I just had to contend with my own narrative and what is the arc of that narrative. And in this book, I had to contend with two. So it was like both my own quest to find Linda, but then I also rendered her life, which I don't know, my literary agent and I were like laughing once because her life is like it's kind of a tragedy. It's like a tragic life. Like she never found her daughter. She died penniless in Cripple Creek, Colorado. She didn't really have this renaissance. During the 1980s, she sold the rights to her books and to her work to this woman, and she tried to peddle Linda Goodman themed lotions and like pillows. And so I think there was this attempt to sort of capitalize on this former success that she had, but that never really happened. I mean, her estate went into bankruptcy. And so I think that was a challenge for me too. It's like, how do I tell the story of this woman and like continually make it interesting, but then also acknowledge the reality of her life that like in a lot of ways her life really was tragic. And so in the process of writing this, like at one summer I had all these posters on my wall and I had like my narrative and then Linda's narrative. And then um, the other thing that was tricky about this book and why I guess I think of it as a kind of research memoir is another question for me in the book is like, why do we not remember Linda Goodman? And I had some initial theories like, oh, she sort of falls into this trope of women who grieve and they're not taken seriously. But another question for me was like, well, what was happening in the United States? Because of course, she rode the wave of the New Age being very popular in the 1960s and 70s. And so there were lots of astrologers and astrology, was everywhere. And she was part of that moment. And so the other thing that I had to think about is, well, what happened after that? And of course, we had the 1980s, we had the Reagan administration, we had a really different shift in our cultural consciousness. And so Linda Goodman was not the only astrologer that had to change how they practiced and how they worked. And so astrology as a whole went underground, I would argue. And then, of course, we're experiencing a kind of renaissance today. And so, very simply, Cameron, to answer your question, the first book felt so much easier. And this book, there were so many tears, but it's done. And I'm so grateful I figured it out.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's is quite a journey, and to have to kind of be looking at both those narratives, in terms of writing this at the time in your life, and then because I know your first book had mentioned your interest in astrology as well, and perhaps even Linda Goodman. I
Mhm.
can remember. Yeah. Okay. So I just it seems like there's this interesting kind of connective tissue between them. One of the folks online was asking, and you answered a bit of this, but how much research was required for this book, and did you learn anything shocking, about yourself and or about Linda that in some ways had some resonant, you know, conversations or something like that. And yeah, we'll start with that. That's I think the first half of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how much research did I do for this book? I guess the first thing I should say is I feel like a lot of my research was like failed research. And so it was like tracking people down, writing to people, not getting responses. I reached out. I think if I had done this project 15 years ago, I would have been so much more successful. And I think it was just the kind of a problem, not a problem, but it was just Linda, she would be 100 years old if she was today. And so when I was researching this 5 or 6 years ago, her contemporaries were like in their 80s and 90s. And so I spoke with several children of friends of Linda Goodman. And they said, I'm so sorry. My mother was friends with Linda Goodman, or, I knew Linda Goodman, and this, that, and the other way, but like my mother is dead, or they simply like they don't remember her. And so that was also interesting where I felt like I met this community of people who had known her, but also who weren't really able to speak to her, to her life. Also, I'm sorry, I live right next to the railroad track, so I'm sorry if you can hear the train. Um, so I would say that there were a lot of failed sort of avenues. I think probably the space where I did the most research was thinking about um, astrology in the 1960s and 70s versus the 80s, because I think there's been a lot of stuff written about it because it was a really exciting time, and I feel like there's some really clear political movements that we can point to say like, yes, like this is why we were thinking about the age of Aquarius. This is why astrology was really popular. But then in the 80s, I found a kind of lack of information about that. Mitch Horowitz is a great New Age historian who's done some work about that. And so I felt like I had to sort of draw my own conclusions about that. And so I think that's probably, and I think to me, it felt a little bit scary to do that. I think doing work about the 60s and 70s was exciting because there was all this work about it and there were all these people. And I felt like, oh, like I feel supported in the claims that I'm making. And I think when it came to that question of what was happening during the 80s and 90s, I initially was like, all right, I gotta put on a historian hat and like see if I can make an argument about this. Um, so I think that was probably the most amount of research I did. I also had a few interviews that ended up being really pivotal in terms of, and if you read the book, I think you'll know what interview it is, that ended up being really sort of pivotal for how I understood Linda Goodman. And in a way, um, I guess what I should say is there's this book from I think it's the 50s or 60s. It's by Leon Edel, who is a biographical scholar. And in his book, he says something like, usually people get into writing biography about a literary figure because you love them. Like you've read Sylvia Plath and you think Sylvia Plath is great. You've read Cameron McGill and you think he's wonderful. And so you want to write a biography about his life. And the metaphor that Leon Edel uses is writing a biography is like kind of a courtship or a marriage. You start off and you're really seduced and you're so excited. And then the more information you find, you fall out of love. And I still love Linda Goodman, and she's still a part of my literary journal and like my, when I think about my personal growth. But there was certainly information that was shocking to me. And I think even and I actually like one of the interviews that I talked with this about someone. I was like, I found out all this information and I thought Linda Goodman, like she felt like my mother. Like I loved her. And then I found out all this information and she seems like she was kind of like a crank. Like she didn't like people. And this person was like, yeah, this is true. Like she had a kind of persona in her writing that was really different than who she was. And so I think part of the book for me, um, it's about a parasocial relationship and it's about this person that I had this persona of. And so I agree with Leon Edel. It is a little bit about like kind of falling out of love and what does it mean to see someone with greater clarity. And so that's also part of the book is, grappling with like what happens when you learn so much about someone that you knew from a distance and it really changes how you see them.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's interesting too to think about, like you mentioned a bit earlier, like the research kind of dead ends where you were trying to get in touch with folks and like it didn't quite happen, and how much of those kind of near misses became part of that story of the search for Linda and or not. I mean, I'm assuming some of them become a bit of the story of just trying to track something down, not that you had found out what you wanted to find out. And is there anything that resonant that came of those dead ends, as it were?
Yeah, I think I think absolutely. I mean, the conversation that I talk about earlier where I met this guy and she was like, she's 500 years old. I mean, that kind of like blew open the project for me in a way that was really like both sort of like heartbreaking and exciting. Um, I think probably, and so I think the thing I love about creative nonfiction is that like just because you encounter an obstacle doesn't mean you have to stop. You just like contemplate the obstacle and like what does this obstacle tell us? And so I think yeah, so I like there's only one obstacle that I don't chronicle in the book, but I think all of the obstacles were really ultimately really useful. I mean, thinking about like what does it mean to tell a story about someone who thinks they're 400 years old? Fascinating. Like, I think at the time when I was writing, I was in such despair. But once I was able to sort of wrap my arms around it and say, okay, I'm going to imagine this, and I'm just going to be the guide on this imagined tour of Linda Goodman, and I'm going to show you my sources, and I'm going to contemplate them. That seemed a little bit, um, that seemed more doable. I think probably, and this didn't end up going in the book because it was just too late. Um, I think probably the most like empowered moment I felt when I was doing this research was that this was when I was researching the 80s and the 90s and the end of her life and trying to find some information, which was a part of her life that was probably the most like I just didn't have a lot. And so I ended up getting in touch with a photographer from a photographer who knew Linda Goodman, and this photographer had photographs of her from the end of her life. And so I was like, could I look at these photographs? And this particular person wanted a fee, and it was quite a large fee. And so I explained, I was like, well, like and I was, and this person was like, well, I know you work at a university, and universities have deep pockets. And I was like, well, here's the deal. That's actually like, that's not true. And at the time I was working at this job in Florida. I like was teaching for, like, I was like, I do not have funds to like I mean I would be happy to offer a kind of monetary like some sort of fee for your time, but I don't have thousands of dollars to give to you. Can't even really pay my rent. And I was in such conflict about it. I was like, do I need these photographs? And ultimately I was like, no, like I don't think I need to see these photographs. Like I don't know if it's going to change what I know about Linda. And so I like didn't look at them. I didn't pay the fee. And then I felt like the book was done.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how those kinds of choices at the time seem like this is the right thing to do, and this will impact the book in a certain way or not. But if it's one of those things where like saying no, and not needing to look made you feel that the book was done, then sounds like you perhaps chose wisely. Um, that's interesting. Thinking about that, like it was too in some of the things you were talking about in terms of being too late to be in the book. So we have a lot of creative writing students, undergrad creative writing students who are also in our editing and publishing certificate and take creative writing classes across all the genres. And so we get some kind of like some more kind of practical publishing questions, which is, and this question is like about was there a most challenging part of the publishing journey for this
Mhm.
particular book? And if so, um, you know, what was that and what was it like?
Yeah, what was the most challenging part? I'm gonna give you like the cheesiest answer. I actually think the most challenging part was like me believing that it could be published. I think I just really approached this project initially from a space of like, nobody's going to want to read this. Like, it's too hard. Like, I don't have enough information to do this. Nobody cares about this woman. And so I think in the process of doing this, I had to overcome that and just to say, and to really like believe in the project and believe in what I was doing. Um, but I will also say, my book, it was on the like, I'm forgetting the language that they use. Like it was on the market for like 2.5 years. So I mean, I got 2.5 years of rejections on the manuscript. And even like getting an agent, I think I queried 118 agents before I got a yes. And so this was definitely a project of tenacity. And so I think that's probably what was the hardest part was like my own sort of confidence in the project, which certainly like getting all the rejections didn't help. But I also think that was part of it for me is I think I had to go through those rejections to um, kind of like see if I really believed in the book. Yeah. Um, but I
Yeah.
will, yeah, but I'll also say, I know that probably in the editing and publishing students, they're thinking of it from a different angle, probably not as authors. But I think part of it for me too, and I don't even know if this is just me, or like, I don't know if this is particular to this project, but I think what can be challenging is the relationship between capitalism and commerce and art.
Hmm.
And like, how do you
Oh, yeah.
maintain a sense of integrity
Mhm.
when you have to contend with all of those things, which I think is something that I feel like probably anyone who works in publishing, um, unless you're just like really into celebrity memoirs, probably has to contend with.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And rejections is a huge part of it, right? And the slush piles or just entering contests and all the things that um, you get kind of caught up, or at least I do. You can get caught up in the calendar of when things are due, and then before you know it, you're in the second year of rounds of submitting to this one you submitted to a couple of years ago, and it hits. But there's this point of you know you were saying like, okay, no one really wanted to hear about this one, but you did, and you invested that time and energy to honor this person's legacy and to investigate it a bit. And I think at the end of the day, it's just like we all work alone on the project, and not alone, but to push it forward to a place where it's just like this is what I wanted to do with this, and if someone else picks up on the interest, even a sliver of the interest that I have in this, I find that to be quite wonderful. And yeah, I'm not sure, but the students, I think, maybe think about it in terms of questions as potential editors, but also as folks that maybe are beginning to start sending out their work to journals and things like this. And um, I don't know if this was your sense of it, but when I first started sending things out to journals and I received a rejection, I was actually quite pleased that the process worked. You know what I mean? I had come from like the music world, and yeah, send me your demo, kid, whatever you sent. You never hear back. You know what I mean? But to like submit some poems and someone reads them, and then they're like, thank you, but no. And you're like, oh, well, okay, that the process worked. And I found that to be quite quite like, reassuring, I guess. So that's interesting. It's certainly part of it. Yeah. Well, thanks for that honest answer. I am this next one's quite a bit different. Speaking of signs, do you find yourself analyzing people by their birth charts, perhaps prior MFA cohort members? How does this concept of people being related to the stars, um, also known as we are all made of stardust, translate across cultures and languages?
Hmm.
Yeah, this one's going to the far reaches.
It is. Okay. So I should
Where do you want
give,
to start?
okay, I should give the disclaimer that I do not claim to be an astrologer. I've studied astrology, but astrology is math, and I I get a little bored, but I do think it's very interesting, and I like love knowing what people's birth charts are, and it's been really useful and fun for me in relationships and in friendships and just knowing what group dynamics are. So astrology, and I don't know if this question is coming from someone who knows a lot about astrology or who doesn't. So I'm going to give you a really broad answer, but astrology's been around for like millennia, and there's lots of different styles of astrology. There's Vedic astrology, which is really popular in India, which is a completely different sort of style of astrology. If you actually, no, I was about to say something, but I don't think it's true. Sometimes if you hear people on the internet, I feel like every 18 months, there's like some article that's like, there's a 13th sign. And then people freak out because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not an Aries. I'm really a Pisces. I don't think I'm a Pisces, or whatever way it goes in the zodiac. I think that comes up because people look at different forms of astrology and they're like, wait a minute, in like this form of astrology, there's this. But I think Vedic astrology is quite interesting. If you even just visually, it's very different than Western astrology. I think it's on a grid. Um, and so there's that. But even in the United States, we have lots of different traditions of astrology. And what I think is particularly interesting about astrology in the United States right now is that, in the past, if you look at astrologers from the 1920s or 1930s, it's so fatalistic. It's like, Cameron, if you have Saturn in the eighth house, you're not going to make it past 70. I mean, not exactly, but it can be very, very fatalistic. And so I think looking at different schools of astrology can be really exciting because it's simply a translation of the stars, and all translations are different, and they're based upon who is the translator and what is the cultural context of the translation. And so I think if you're interested in astrology, I think it's really useful to look at different traditions of astrology and to see what, really resonates with you. And so, because certain things won't. Like there's certain schools of astrology where I'm like, meh, I don't, that's too like some people are interested in I don't know if this is I guess this is a school of astrology. Astrocartography can be kind of fun, where you look at the lines of planets in relationship to location. And so I think it's funny to talk with astrology people because some people are like, I love astrocartology. I like went to Colorado and I fell in love because my Venus line was there. And then other people are like, well, that's just a bunch of BS. And so, even among astrologers, there's really strong feelings about particular schools of astrology. And so I apologize if that's not a great answer, but the questioner is correct. There are many different schools
Yeah.
and traditions.
I think it's a fantastic answer. I mean, if we think about the history of human beings and looking up at the stars for as long as we've been able to look up at the stars, you think of this thing that's kind of been our constant companion since we've existed.
Mhm.
And it's quite interesting to think about because it's one of those things that is of our world and not of our world. And isn't that always the types of things that we're trying to draw meaning from?
Mhm.
And I quite love that answer of yours. So um, let's see. You might have already answered this a bit, and maybe this is our last one, or we can just kind of see if there's some other things you want to talk about. We can do that as well. But this last question was, what first inspired you to pursue Linda Goodman's story in terms of like a book form, in terms of this biography, and knowing that, and perhaps that's even prior to even mentioning her in the first book. But well, yeah, what was your kind of journey there if you're actually devoting a book to her?
Mhm. I mean, I think it was love, like truly, like I like loved her work. I mean, this book that I have here, I've had this book for like, I don't know, 25 years. I really truly just like loved her work. And it was just astonishing to me that when I would talk with people who were really into astrology, in the 2000s, that they didn't know who she was. Or when I would talk with astrologers, like professional astrologers, they would laugh at me. They'd be like, "Oh, Linda Goodman, she's just, pop astrologer, blah, blah, blah." And I really truly felt like, well, and I still feel this way. I think she's a great writer. I mean, I think her books are funny. Admittedly, they are dated in many ways. I just think she's a great writer. I think she's funny. I think that she did something really profound, and I think she did something challenging. She took astrology, which often at the time had this very obscure, archaic language, and she translated it into something that people could access. I also think that, you know, I, if you read the book, you'll see that Linda is a really complex, challenging figure. Um, but I will also say, I think that Linda Goodman is ultimately someone who believed in harmony. And she was someone who believed in love. I think she was someone who believed that if we could simply understand each other, like if I could just know, Cameron, that you're a Leo and you're going to do this, and you know that I'm an Aries, and this is just the way I am, and we mean no harm to each other. We're just acting as the stars compel us to. I mean, I actually think she was quite humanitarian. And I think that's a part of astrology that I think remains today. And I don't think that's something that I think that was kind of new. I think that was a very Age of Aquarian 1960s, 70s viewpoint to take on astrology. And so when I began, and I still feel this way, like I really do think she's a really important figure when we think about America, like the history of American pop culture. Um, I will also say that if I started this project when I was doing my PhD, and the only thing I'd ever written was that book that Cameron mentioned, which was a very straightforward memoir, works a lot like a novel, so on and so forth. I think I was able to do this project because I was sort of naive about it and I was very optimistic. And I think if someone had said, Courtney, this is going to take you 6 years, you will drive to Virginia, you will drive to Colorado, you will cry, you will reach out to like dozens of people who will not reply to you. You will, like, if they had just told me sort of what the whole journey would have been, I think I would have been like, that sounds like a lot of work. That's not going to lead to anything. Um, but I even had, I had this started as my dissertation at UC Santa Cruz, where I did my PhD. And I had a member of my committee who was a historian, and she said this to me. She was like, Courtney, this is an impossible project. Like, this is not, I mean, she said it in a way that was like so gentle and like really trying to keep my best interest at heart. But she was like, this is going to be really hard. Like, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, of course I do. I love Linda. And so, yeah, it was a combination of love and just not knowing what was ahead of me. And then by the time I knew what it was, being too stubborn to quit.
I love that. 100%. I mean, that idea of like following something that is of interest, and that if you love and are interested in this person, but also this idea of like, pulling the thread of our obsessions and the things that have always interested us. And that idea of naivete beginning a project, how lovely it was to not, when you first start, to not to know what something needs to be unless the possibilities are endless, and you feel no constraint. And I think that's one of the things that seems to be hard to continue to have in writing. And so to hold on to that and be like, yeah, like, I want to do this, like, is quite lovely. And I think really important for for writers to maybe kind of regenerate themselves, as it were.
Mhm.
Um, well, I'm very grateful for you to take the time with us tonight. Congrats on the new book. I look forward to getting my pre-order, and it's it sounds like it was an emotional journey for you, and to me, that's, whether you know astrology or not, that's what brings me in, is like the emotional journey that you had. So I think that's quite interesting. Really grateful for you to take the time, and congrats to you on the book, second
Oh my
book.
gosh. Thanks, Cameron. Thanks everyone for being here. And I also want to say you get the naivete back. It comes back. It's like a wave. It comes in, it goes away.
Hmm.
I still feel like
Hmm.
bashful and sweet about this book, even though I also cried. So don't, it comes
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Yeah,
Thank
good,
you.
good, good, good. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. And the pre-order link is in the YouTube live chat. We hope you'll get the book. Thank you for your questions, and we will see you again next time.
Thank you so much.